We have so many different English language Bible versions. Which one is the best? Why does it matter? I'm going to read Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 in two different Bible versions. See if you notice the difference. Take heed that ye do not your alms for men, to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. That's version number 1, the King James Version, the one that you read now. Version number 2. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. That is from the New American Standard Version. New American Standard Bible, 1995 edition. Now, I am not referring to the pronoun differences, which some people seem to complain about, where the King James says ye and the modern version says you. Nor am I talking about the translations of the verbs in these texts where the King James says take heed, the New American Standard says beware, or where the King James says to be seen of them, and then the New American Standard says to be noticed by them. These differences are very minor and they do not change the meaning of the text. Notice the words alms and righteousness, where the King James Version says, take heed that you do not your alms before men. New American Standard says, beware of practicing your righteousness before men. The question is, which one of these two verbs in these two versions are correct? Is this simply a mistranslation? What is the answer to this? Is the word alms the correct word, or is the word righteousness the correct word? The answer to both are correct depending upon which Greek source text you refer back to. So neither one are wrong and neither one are necessarily better. Is this confusing? Well, stay tuned and I will explain in greater detail. In my episode today, I will explain why there are different English language Bible versions, why they are different from the King James Version, why it matters, or does it? So, all right, and we're back. Yes, this is Keeping It Real for Christ, and I am Joey. Caden is not going to be here today. It's just going to be me because me and Caden had talked about us doing this topic on the Greek source texts and the different Bibles and how it all came about. So today you have me, and the topic today is which Bible version is the best? Does it matter? And I read to you two different Bible versions for the verse of Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. And I am going to get back that, so hold on, please. I know all these fancy YouTube creators say you need to get straight to your text right away, but I will. So please don't swipe away. Stay with me. I promise. This is going to be a very informative video. So stay with me, please. So here we go. I'm going to get right into it. It's going to be kind of lengthy. I'm going to give a little bit of detail, but like if you want to see a 3-hour discussion on the Greek source text and how the Bible was formed, you can look up James White, but you're going to suffer through 3 or 4 hours. And I've been through it and I haven't sat down and watched it in one sitting. It took me 3 or 4 times. So give me 30 minutes, maybe 30 minutes tops, and I will give you a good rundown of why we have different Bible versions. And should we just stick with the King James Version? Is that the best, or some of the new ones the best? So hold on, here we go. When I was growing up as a kid in Kentucky, going to a small Baptist church in a small town, I remember hearing the King James Version is the only version to read. It's almost as if the people who taught me this acted as if the King James Version was the only Bible there ever was. Like this was God's breathed word. Now, I am not trying to disparage those people, nor am I trying to discredit the King James Bible. All right, I'm going to say this up front. I still view that Bible as a trustworthy Bible, but that is not the only Bible that God give to us. So here we go. Now I also heard different things like Don't trust the other Bible versions. Like the NIV is evil. Don't read those Living Bibles. I don't know if you remember those. I'm in my 50s. So if you're my age or older, you remember the Living Bible. That was one of the first paraphrases. And it was kind of like a storybook Bible. And we were told by many people when I was growing up, don't read those Bibles. You cannot trust them. I don't think that no more. For most of my life, I was indeed myself a King James Version only person. I wouldn't dare read those newer versions, especially the ones that left out the words and the phrases in the multiple verses and left out half of a chapter. Then I started learning the New Testament Greek and Hebrew. I started learning Christian history, and I started learning how they actually formatted the Bible over the past 1,500 years. And my impression of things started changing. My mind started changing. So I'm going to keep this short and to the point, and I won't go into in depth over the thousands of years of development of the Bible, but I want to give you a little bit of background so you can know why do we have different English Bible versions and which one is correct. So to begin with, let's go back to the Hellenistic period, directly after the conquest of the known world by Alexander the Great. You remember when Alexander the Great conquered the Babylonians and the Persians, and he took over, and the Medes too. He took over that empire, and he expanded all the way over into from Greece all the way over to Asia and India, and then he got run off. So that known world that he conquered, he brought the Greek language with it, and that Greek language survived well into the Byzantine era, past the Roman era, all the way into the Byzantine era. So while we are confident that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew and Aramaic, around 285 BC, a team of about 70 scholars translated the Old Testament into Greek, and they call that the Septuagint after the number 70 in Greek. Since then, and all the way up to modern times, while translators still use the Hebrew and Aramaic as much as possible, the Septuagint is still referred to when translating and still heavily used as a translating tool, the Septuagint, and that is the Greek Old Testament scriptures. As a matter of fact, many of the names of the books of the Old Testament, for example, Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Psalm, are in fact direct translations from the Greek language of the Septuagint. Something to wrap your mind around here. This is something that took me a while to actually process. And you may have to think about this. You may have to go back and read this again. But something to think about here is we do not have any of the original writings of the writers of the New Testament. So what do I mean by that? We do not have the actual handwritten copy of John. So like, this is my handwritten copy. I wrote this. We do not have the actual papers that John wrote, or that Matthew wrote, or that Luke wrote, or Paul, or Peter. Those are the scholars call them the autographs. Those have been gone for years. The best we have in a small amount is copies of copies that scribes and other writers have copied, and the earliest of those is about 250 to 300 AD. So the best we have of the original writings of the New Testament is a copy of a copy of a copy 200 years after the original writers wrote it. You may have to go back and read that again. Listen to that again. The Holy Book of Christians started officially coming together around 330 AD with the book called the Codex Sinaiticus. Then in 340 AD, another document came together known as the Codex Vaticanus. And then after that was the Codex Alexandrinus, which was in 425 AD. All three were again written in the Koine Greek of that time period. And then around the turn of the 5th century, right around 396, 398 AD, Emperor Theodosius declared that the Roman Empire is officially Christian. and they started drafting their religious books. And so they took these Greek Bibles and they got a guy named Jerome to translate it into Latin. So around 400 AD, Jerome translated the Bible into Latin and he called it the Vulgate. This Latin Vulgate has been the Catholic Church's #1 source text for thousands of years. And I still believe, and if somebody else knows any different, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm okay with that. I still believe Latin is considered the dominant source of the Bible in the Catholic religion. And the Latin Vulgate was the dominant source up until around the 1400s, the end of the 1400s, after the printing press. A guy named Desiderius Erasmus recreated an updated Greek text from the manuscripts that he had available to him, which was limited. But scholars have concluded that what he had, the best amount of documents that he had, even though limited in scope, was trustworthy. He created his Greek New Text in 1516 AD. Now, the King James Version that we read, that was first printed in 1611, and like most people say, it was printed from the Textus Receptus Greek text, which is basically the 1598 revised edition of the Erasmus text. Now, the King James Version and the 1598 Greek New Testament would stand as the only biblical standard minus the Latin Vulgate until 1881. After newly discovered older Greek text manuscripts, scholars Westcott and Hort went through meticulous efforts examining the newly discovered manuscripts, and they concluded that after examining these texts, and after archaeological finds of many different manuscripts, that they determined to be trustworthy. And these manuscripts they found in the 1800s, they determined to be more older and more accurate than the ones that were available to Erasmus and his team 300 years earlier. They created their own Greek source texts. While scholars debated the efforts of Westcott and Hort, most modern scholars believe that the Greek source text of the New Testament that was developed by Westcott and Hort is more superior than that of the Erasmus that he had, that was used to create the King James Version. The first English language Bible was published using the Westcott and Hort text, was called the Revised Version. That was in 1881. And later on after that, the American Standard Version was published using the new Greek text used by Westcott and Hort. And that version was published in 1901. Now, the most modern versions that we have used an even more updated form of the Greek text other than what Westcott and Hort has. The modern Greek text source that we have that has been used to translate the modern Bible versions have been enhanced by the recent archaeological findings, especially the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered between a time period of 1946 and 1956. The differences between the King James Version and the modern version stem from the fact that the King James Version uses the 1598 Erasmus and Stephanus edited text specifically. And the modern Bible translations stem from the modern Greek transcripts reconstructed with the modern updates of the archaeological finds, most specifically the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This brings me back to the differences of Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. The King James Version says alms, and or charitable deeds, like the New King James Version says. Because of the words used here, they came from the 1598 Greek text. The word used here in the King James Version from the 1598 Greek text is eleemasanin, which is translated alms or like the New King James Version says, charitable deeds. Now, for all the versions from 1881, Westcott and Hort's text, all the way through to modern versions, eleemosinin is not used here, but a different word is used, dikaiosinin. So in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, it reads, do not be practicing your righteousness before men. So that is where we get the word dikaiosinin, which translates righteousness. So which one is right? When formulating the text of the New Testament, the biggest problem we have to deal with is we do not have the original copies, like I've said before. And we cannot determine for sure which word Matthew used, but we can deduce it. We can evaluate it, and we can narrow it down. So what the translators did, what the scholars did, is they had the copies of the manuscripts, thousands of manuscripts, and they determined by how many copies had one word and how many copies had the other. Modern scholars come to the conclusion that dikaiosinin is the word that should be inserted here through the proof text of the manuscripts that we have. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 has more manuscript copies in the newer Greek text to support the word dikaiosinin than they do from the word eleemosinin from the 1598 Greek source text. I believe the following verses, the verses following Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, verses 2 through 18, where Jesus talks about do not be practicing your righteousness before men when you give, like the hypocrites, because they are self-righteous. Do not be practicing your righteousness before men when you pray, like the hypocrites who stand on the street corners and they demonstrate their self-righteousness. And do not be practicing your righteousness before men when you fast, like the hypocrites do, because they are being self-righteous. So I believe the word dikaiosinin inserted in verse 1 fits the rest of the text that Jesus is describing here for verses 1 through 18. In the case where words or verses are missing altogether, such as in the case of the NIV, those words, those verses, did not have enough sufficient manuscript support for the scholars of the New Greek source text to include them in there. And for the case of the NIV, for example, they leave those verses out altogether. So when you read the NIV, you'll notice like the last part of the last chapter of Mark, the book of Mark, those verses are gone altogether. Some of the newer Bible versions, like the NASB or the ESV, they may have in brackets. These verses are disputed text and may not be in the original writings. So at least some of the versions will put the ones that should be omitted, or scholars think maybe should be omitted. They'll put those in brackets, where the NIV just leaves them out altogether, which in most cases, I believe the NIV is correct. As someone who has studied the formation of the Bible languages, the Greek and Hebrew, and the formation of the New Testament Greek sources, I view the newer versions as more superior to the King James Version. Currently, the versions I like best are the New American Standard, the 1995 edition, because if you go to the 2020 edition, there are some changes that are not consistent to the 1995. I like the Holman Christian Standard Bible, or if you use the newer Christian Standard Bible, I like that too. The ESV is okay. I like the Legacy Standard Bible, which is one of the newest ones. But if you stick to the King James Version, if you say, I'm just going to read the King James Version because that's what I trust, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's my opinion, from what I've learned when I've studied, that the newer versions are much more superior. In the midst of all this Bible version talk, many will say that we must use the King James Version because, after all, it is the authorized version. But do they clearly know what that means? Why is it called the authorized version? Who authorized it? And for what reason? Well, during the 1600s, the King James Version was not the only English version out there. Like some of you may know that. Some of you may have never realized that that was not the only English language Bible version out there. There was the Wycliffe version, which was translated before Erasmus Greek text, and Wycliffe translated from the Latin Vulgate. Then there is the Tyndale version, which was translated after the Greek text of Erasmus. Then you have the Coverdale version. Then you have the Matthew's Bible, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, and then the Geneva Bible, which is believed to have been used by the Pilgrims when they came over to the New Land. All these Bibles, minus the Wycliffe, from the Tyndale version all the way to the Geneva Bible, all these Bibles were published in the 1500s. So they would have been available to those people in the Church of England living in Great Britain. So King James knew that these versions were out there. He only authorized the version that he commissioned to be the official version of the Church of England. So if you were a citizen or a member of the Church of England, the only version you were authorized to use was the one that King James commissioned and approved. It would be like today, somebody appointed as a religious expert. Let's say President Trump appointed somebody. You picked your religion. John MacArthur. That's just the first person that came to mind. Said, Dr. MacArthur, this is President Trump. I want you to designate an official Bible version for us, and whatever you recommend, that's what I'm going to do. And so the latest version he's part of is the Legacy Standard Version. So John MacArthur says, President Trump, I recommend the Legacy Standard Version. So President Trump said, okay, I, President Trump, make an official executive order that the United States of America, the only Bible we will authorize is the Legacy Standard Version. That's basically the same thing that King James did in 1611. The reason we have various New English language Bible versions depend upon the translation team's reasoning for that particular Bible version. For example, the translators of the Legacy Standard Bible wanted to update a more literal version of the one like the New American Standard Bible in 1995 edition. But to take some of the Greek words and give them a more accurate, not a more modern meaning, but a more accurate meaning, like the word doulos, which a lot of people, in a lot of versions, translate as servant, but the actual term for the word doulos is slave. So in our current society, that word is just not seen as very, it's just, well, that word's seen as offensive. But also, the Legacy Standard Version translate the word where you see in your Bible, especially in the Old Testament, Lord in all capitals. That word is actually from the Hebrew Yahweh. And that's what the Legacy Standard does with that word. For every occurrence where you see Lord in the capitals, the Legacy Standard translates that to Yahweh. So I can read nearly most of the Bible translations we have, other than a few instances in the Christian Standard Version. Yahweh, the word Yahweh is not in there. But in the Legacy Standard Version, every single time that word appears in Hebrew, it is translated Yahweh. Today's modern Bible versions come in three categories. Category number one is the word for word, or what you would call the literal translation. Category number two is thought for thought translation, where they are focusing more on the meanings of the word and phrases where you can understand it better, not necessarily the word translated literally. And I'm going to give you an example soon. And category number three, the paraphrases. These are the storytellers, like the Living Bible that I talked about previously. These adds words and phrases to kind of smooth it out and give it a more understandable meaning. Modern Bible versions that fall into the word for word translation include the NASB, the ESV, the Legacy Standard Bible, the Holman Christian Standard Bible. The good example of a passage for the word for word in the New American Standard Bible comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, where the New American Standard Bible, 1995 edition, says, or do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor homosexuals. So when I stress the words effeminate, nor homosexuals, because in a lot of the other versions, those words are not properly translated. In the Greek text, the word effeminate comes from malakos, and the word homosexual comes from arsenokote. So these words are translated literally in versions like the New American Standard Bible. This is the correct word for word translation for these words. Many other versions steer away from using the word effeminate because it just doesn't fit today's time. We're living in a world where we just can't say that men are effeminate and churches are effeminate. So a lot of Bible versions don't use that word. The NIV is said to fit the thought for thought translation category. Again, looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, the NIV states, or do you not know that wrongdoers? So instead of unrighteous, they use wrongdoers. Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men. So you don't see the word effeminate, but I do like what they say here with the word arsenokoitai. They said men who have sex with men, because the word arsenokoitai means arsen means man and koitus means sexual relations, physical relations. So men who have sex with men is a good understandable translation here. So that's your thought by thought. Would not necessarily want to be literally accurate, but more understandable. And then we have the paraphrase. So let me give you an example of a paraphrase. Many tend to stay away from the paraphrase. There are some that I do not recommend, like the Message. I do not recommend that one. I do at times refer to the amplified version, although I do not teach out of that version. I will look at it occasionally to give, and here's an example of what the amplified says. And let's go back to this one. We're going to use John chapter 21, verse 15 from the amplified version, where it says, Jesus is speaking, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And then in brackets it says, these others do, with total commitment. And he said to him, this Peter, yes, Lord, you know that I love you with a deep personal affection as a close friend. And that with a deep personal affection as a close friend is in brackets. In this case, Jesus uses the verbs, the Greek text, agapes, when he says, Peter, do you love me? Do you agapes me? Agapes is the verb used, which indicates a higher form of love, the highest form, what they call the godly love, with total commitment, total devotion to him. He responds with the verb philo, which is a more friendly type of love. So when Peter responds to Jesus, he's not saying, I love you with the highest form of love. He's actually saying, I philo you, which means I love you as a deep, personal, close friend, which Amplified version really explains. So I like that. So I may not have convinced you of anything, but hopefully I've given you some reasons why we have all these different Bible versions. And which ones can you trust? I would say, as far as like paraphrase, I would stay away from the Message. As far as the other versions, stay away from the New World Standard version. That's the Jehovah's Witness Bible. And unless you're a Catholic, I would not use the Catholic Bible because it may be too confusing to you. But if you're a Catholic and you like your Catholic Bible, then all means use it. But if you're a Protestant, Baptist, non-denominational, I would steer clear from the Catholic Bible because it may be too confusing to you. And some people are going to be upset with me. If you are, that's fine. But I do not trust the books of the Apocrypha as God-inspired writings. I like some of the historical things, like in the book of Maccabees. I like some of that. But a lot of the things that are in the Apocrypha are not exactly factual. They're more of a literal, artistic view of things than they are factual, inspired words. So I would steer clear of the Apocrypha too. So I like the New American Standard and I like the Legacy Standard. And occasionally I still go to the King James Version. So uh, I don't know if this answers the question. That gives you something to think about. So I hope you like this video. And as always, I am keeping it real for Christ and just trying to give you a better perspective on the Bible. So thank you for watching this video.